1.
Oh, thank you, everybody, for coming to this special meeting tonight. And it's kind of nice when you don't have to go outside and you just have to do these Zoom meetings, especially when it's a little storming up here, Bill. We got like snow. Just want to let you know that, eh? Hope it's not been too hot for you down there.
It was 24 and sunny today. Sorry.
Yeah, we don't want to hear about it. Yeah. Anyways, the only good news is normally we'd be at Roma down in Toronto and being in a blizzard down there. They had 5 centimeters, and that pretty well makes them bring out the army. So it'll be quite interesting. Anyways, I'll call the meeting to order. Disclosure any peculiar interest on the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. I'm looking, I don't see any, so that's good. Moved by Councillor McKenzie, second by Councillor Anderson, the minutes of the January 19th, 2021 Town of Minto Council meeting be approved. All in favor? Opposed? If any? No, we're good. Okay. Moved by Councillor Dirksen, second by Councillor Gudson. The town, is this the one that go into the committee of the whole, Annalee? I've got two things here. I'm just wondering. You're muted.
Yes, that's correct.
Resolution moving, okay, that the town of Minto Council convenes in a committee of the whole. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Good. Moving. Okay, so we have no public meetings, but we have a delegation. Actually, an amazing delegation tonight. We have a lot of key people on this, and just to give you a heads up, and Chris maybe will tell you, but I'll tell you ahead. Derek won't be with us tonight. Chris is filling in because he's had a little bit of a tooth thing. So anyways, Chris is well aware of what the situation is. He started this project way back with Bill and Triton. So I'll maybe just turn it over to Chris, and you can get the ball rolling here.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that, and appreciate everyone coming out tonight and all the attendees. It's good to see people can see the outcome of many years of working at this, and council is quite aware of this process and what we've been through, and all the work that we've done towards getting this plan towards it. Bill White, who's joining us tonight from Texas, can attest. He started the project when he was the CAO here, and we were lucky enough to have him carry on as a consultant to help finish this project or get it close to finish. I don't know if the project will ever be finished because there's a lot of work ahead of it, which we'll talk about later in the presentation. But also joining us tonight is Chris Clark, our engineer from Triton Engineering, and Stephen Jackson from Maitland Valley. We're lucky that we have a great partnership with Maitland Valley in this, and it's come through pretty solidly while we're doing this project and talking with them, and what great partners they are in this, because they realize that Hairston is so prone to flooding and is had some bad episodes, I guess, as we could say, in the past few years. So they're on board with wanting to help this. So what we have for you tonight is a presentation. It's a summary of kind of the plan that we've been working on for many years. You're going to get this plan, and these two gentlemen, Chris and Bill, are going to speak tonight, and Mike McIsaac's, I forgot to mention him, but he's also here from the town staff. That's going to kind of sum it up at the end. It's a culmination of everything that we talked about. As you can recall, we've had 2 public meetings and a 3rd virtual public meeting on this plan, and received a lot of input from the community and from different citizen groups. And this is the presentation to kind of sum it all up of where we've come with the plan. And then you won't be making any decisions tonight, but you'll be able to ask questions and see the final plan. And then a report will be coming to a following council meeting for a recommendation from staff for you to adopt the plan. And we can move forward into starting to implement different things in the plan as we go along. Also, a reminder that just because when you get to the stage of when you adopt the plan, it doesn't mean that you are saying that we are doing the work right away and we're going to. There's still lots of public input that can come into different areas, different budget cycles that you will get to look at this and things. But we will be referring to the plan quite often to say, if adopted, this is the direction that we're taking. So it is giving us direction, but there will be still times in the future for some more consultation and for more talk about different aspects of the plan. So if we could get the presentation brought up onto the screen, that would be great. And that is definitely not me because I don't know how to do that. Perfect. So this is what we've firmly called the Hairston Flood Mitigation Study. The plan was, the final draft was done in December 2020. If we could have the next slide, please. So tonight you're going to hear, as I said, opening remarks from myself, who's filling in for Derek. Then you're going to hear Bill White's going to come on from Triton, and as you know, formerly our CAO, and he's going to do the introduction and take you through kind of the steps and remind you of where the plan started and where we've come from with the plan. And then we'll get into some technical information that Chris Clark's going to talk about. And then also some estimated costs and next steps Chris is going to talk about. And then Mike McKay is going to come on and summarize kind of the work that we have done and where we want to go in the future with different things. So that's what you're going to hear tonight. And then there'll be, what we do ask though is kind of write your questions out or keep your questions. And we're going to go through the whole presentation, and then we'll take all of your questions at the end, just so that we don't get sidetracked in that. But just, yeah, the opening remarks, it's a comprehensive review of everything. I'm not going to read the whole sentence, but it has been a very comprehensive review that's been years in the making, and a lot of work undertaken by different people to get this to where it is. As you remember, we used the funding that we got, I think a couple years ago at least, if not more, to do the LiDAR mapping. So it's using the latest technology, and that LiDAR mapping assisted us greatly in being able to see the contours of the land and low spots, and really helped with the modeling that we were able to, as a team, be able to work on. You know, we teamed with Maitland Valley and Triton and everybody to get that to where it is. There's going to be a proposed implementation strategy for this, and there'll be some short, mid, and we know there's some long-term actions. This is, you know, not going to be done next year. It's not going to probably be done in 5 years. It's going to take a lot of partnerships that we're going to have to create in the future, particularly hopefully with the federal and provincial government to give us some money for this. But as the other two gentlemen will talk about, one of the big things that they look for is being shovel ready. We all know that term, and we know what that's like. So if we can get this plan to where we're happy and we're passed and adopted it, and we can do some more of the research and environmental studies and stuff like that to get this to the point where it's shovel ready, that's what the governments want to see. So that'll put us in a really good position moving forward to have all of this this done. And as the bottom point is we are going to have to make some requests, because we know we're not going to be able to do this on our own. And so we're going to have to look for some definite future partnerships with this. So with that, I get to shut up and I get to pass this over to Bill, and Bill is going to take us through that. So
Thank you,
Right.
Chris. Thank you.
Excuse me, it's Judy. The screen, the slide deck, it's very blurry for me. Is it clear for everybody else? Is that just me, or? Like I can read the
It
bold
was
writing.
blurry
but
at the beginning, Judy, but mine's clear now.
Mine's clear.
Mine's clear.
Mine's clear.
Okay. Okay, I guess it's just me. All right. I do have my glasses on. Okay, sorry, Bill.
Judy, can you get it? I've got mine up on my my iPad as well. Or you have probably using your iPad, aren't you? Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay.
You ready to go?
What page is the presentation on in the slide deck in the package? Does anybody have that?
So
It's under delegations, Triton Engineering, and there's two clips. So if you want to hit one of those, the second clip.
Second clip, yep.
No, I didn't do it that way. I did it off the website. Okay, don't worry about it. Thank you.
okay, so it's good to see most of you today again. I don't think I've spoken to you since last October. That was before we came down here for, actually, there was a death in the family, Terry's family. So we came down around Thanksgiving, and with the state of things today, we've decided to stay for the foreseeable future. So it's really great to be able to participate in this fashion. I'm on the slide that's study methodology and vision. And it's one that's similar to one back in November of 2019, seems eons ago, we did a brief presentation on where this project was. And this slide is from that. And it's just to let you know that we did follow a provincial guideline in preparing this report. And that little upside down triangle with vision, goals, objectives, and targets, that's from their standard. And we are going ahead consistent with the town's strategic plan. There are 5 goals, 20 objectives, and 7 targets in the plan drafted. And the proposed objective is listed at the bottom there. I won't read it, but it's practical corrective actions, a realistic financial strategy that the town and partners can complete over 20 years to increase public safety and reduce or eliminate property damage caused by the river. The next slide is, the phase 1, existing conditions. So the study has, as mentioned, follows the format of the province. And in the study, there's a lot of information on background and history. And we inventoried existing conditions, almost like the ABCs of the watershed, A being abiotic conditions. So what's the physiography, what's the topography, what's the soils like, and the biotic, or the living environment, the landscape, the vegetation, the wetlands, what's there. There was a natural heritage assessment done by Abood and Associates. So their report is attached as an appendices. It's quite lengthy. The short part of that report is that there are no species that are protected, but there are species at risk in the area. And so as these projects, as we hope they do, go through environmental assessments in the future, there may be some mitigation that needs to be done to protect some of these species. But generally, there is nothing that will prohibit, from a natural environment perspective, going ahead with the projects as outlined. The cultural environment was also looked at. So there's a stage 1 archaeological assessment done, and a look at the cultural heritage, and that was done by another consultant, and that is also attached as an appendix. And again, that sort of identified the features there. There's nothing like land claims or anything like that that are prohibiting moving forward at this point. There may be a need, depending on where work happens during the Class EA process, to do a stage 2, just to make sure that any resources that may be there are protected. But both the cultural and archaeological assessment are done by the professionals, are saying that there's no significant restrictions that would say you need to totally look at other directions for the solutions you're talking about. The technical environment, Chris will go through in detail. I think you'll remember what a floodway and a flood fringe is. The floodway is kind of the fastest part of the river when the water rises, and the flood fringe is the edges of it. And provincial policy, there's no development allowed in the floodway. In the flood fringe, you can have some restricted development, for example, on George Street, where buildings are raised out of the floodplain. So slide phase 2, entitled phase 2 impact scenarios and directions. Back in November 2019, you were presented with, I want to say 14 scenarios, and there was a recommendation to proceed to engineering on, I think, 3 or 4 of them. And that's what happened between November of 2019 and December of 2020, is that Triton and the Conservation Authority looked at those scenarios and came up with 5 alternatives, and narrowed things down and did more engineering to make sure that we were on the right track technically with those alternatives. The phase 3 implementation strategy that involves identifying goals, objectives, and targets. You can read them in there. They're pretty broad. They cover everything from having floodplain mapping to taking having floodplain mapping updated, to taking certain, hoping to take certain lands out of the floodplain within certain time periods. And again, the overall strategy is to phase this work, to do it so that there's partners involved and a realistic funding approach. There is a bit of a financial strategy and capital costs, and there's not a lot of detail about funding. There's some assumptions in there now. We have done some of that work, and we'll be possibly supplying that through your staff in terms of ideas on how to possibly fund this work over the long 20-year period. But that will take some further evaluation, and we'll supply that material to the staff, and they can work with you during your budget process to identify a final funding strategy that will work. As mentioned, there are short-term actions, less than 5 years to take, medium-term actions 5 to 10 years, and long-term actions could be upwards of 20 years. And the beauty of that, I think, is the strategy that the engineers have come up with is that you can do some work that you can handle financially at the beginning within, say, 5 years through, let's say, the municipal drain process. And then that work is not lost. You can build upon that over time and over the years. And if council does choose to move to the full recommended alternative 5 strategy, then sort of nothing is lost by doing the other alternatives. So the slide that I'm looking at now is entitled Harriston Sub Watershed. That, I think, is an interesting slide for a couple of reasons. First, in the right-hand side in that box, you can see the Harriston Sub Watershed relative to the whole Maitland River watershed, which runs all the way to Godrich. You can see that's some maybe 120 kilometers, 100 kilometers, I'm not entirely sure. And then in the bigger map, you can see the sub watershed we're talking about. And interestingly enough, and you probably knew this, but half of the watershed is, almost half, is in Wellington North. And the part in Wellington North is interesting because it drops 85 meters, which from basically Highway 6 to the boundary between the two municipalities. And then from the boundary into Hairston, it only drops 15 meters. So what you have is a fairly broad area in Wellington North draining very quickly to the county road, and then much slower at lower speeds and elevations into Harriston. So over the years, we talked about Harriston kind of being at the bottom of the bathtub, and so the water rushes out of Wellington North and it slows down and backs up in Harriston. And so that's kind of the physical conditions that make it prone to flooding in that area. There is a north branch of the river and a south branch of the river, and that shows it as well. The south branch kind of comes around the bottom of Harriston, and that's part of the involvement in some of this work as well. The slide entitled Study Area, you can see in the box there, that's the Minto town boundaries, and the red dot is Harriston. And then on the aerial photography, you can see some of the key features in the study, mainly those being, and I have to look at this very closely, you can see the former trailer park, the arena, the Northward drain. These are all things very familiar to you, but it's important for these to be outlined in the study when we start talking about alternatives and so forth. The Harriston Conduit, which is that interesting feature in the middle of the downtown, and that conveys a lot of the water. And of course, it kind of ends in a sense for us at the County Road 87 bridge. Where what we're proposing is, as far as work goes, would begin. So that's the study area we're talking about. History of flooding, there's a lovely picture there from 1948, courtesy of the Hairston Historical Society. And Mayor Bridge, I'm not sure if that's you as a young man on that bridge in 1948. I wonder if you remember what that was like. But anyway.
I was 2 years before I was born.
I know. But it's, I love that shot because if you remember June of 2017, we were all standing on that damn bridge then too. And it's probably not the safest thing to do, but anyway, as much as things have changed, some things remain the same. But there's been 15 documented floods over the years in Harriston. That came out of one of the previous engineering studies done in the 70s. June 2017, everyone on council pretty much would remember the severe flood. That is a 1 in 100 year event. And there's actually in the study a very detailed analysis done by the Conservation Authority's consultant that confirms that this was in fact technically a 1 in 100 year event. There was talk about it being even bigger event than that, but we've all settled and agreed that that's what it was. And then just for fun, on the 28th of February 2018, so not long after the June event, we had a 1 in 10 year event with some localized impacts. That was when I was still working for the town. And luckily that one didn't go any further. And I'm not sure you've had anything all that serious since, as I recall. I think this is my final slide for now. The Maitland River that runs through Harriston, interestingly enough, most of it is on, most of Harriston is on the floodplain, most of the residences and businesses. In fact, in the 70s, when they first did the floodplain mapping, almost all of Harriston was identified as floodplain. But as we got more, as everybody got kind of more and more sophisticated and the mapping became better, the floodplain has been able to be narrowed, and also because of things done that have changed over the years. And that includes redoing the Young Street Bridge and some of the old rail bridges that came out. Those have changed the way water moves, not completely, but in some fashions. So the major urban bridges, Young Street, Laura Street, and Arthur Street, they all restrict flow. And what happens is that the water doesn't back up into Harriston. The high flows can't really get through it. So I remember, I think it was Councillor Dirksen, when we first got into this, was kind of interested in the fact that we were looking downstream to do work when I think the focus for many years was upstream and in doing things in town. So the strategies and alternatives that we've come up with now, almost all the work is downstream and or around Harriston and not necessarily inside the urban area, which is interesting, and Chris will go through further. Conservation Authority has identified the intensity of rainfall events now. Over the years, the two groups have worked hard, both the town and the authority, to improve monitoring, and that helped when the flood did hit in 2017. And basically, really when Harriston has to worry about flooding, it's when the soils are saturated and or there's been heavy snowfall and a flash melt, and then there's rain after that. And that's exactly what happened in 2018 in February when we had a flash melt, and also in June of 2017 when we had a week or so before the heavy rainfall, we had a fairly significant storm that saturated the soils, and then 5 or 6 days later the soils were still saturated, the river hadn't risen, and then when that really heavy rain hit, the 170 millimeters maximum in a few hours, that tipped the scale for everything. So it's the combination of a rising water and saturated soils, or snow conditions that prevent runoff. So that's it for me for now. And I think the next slide, technical environment, is where Chris Clark will take over.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Just to recap what Bill mentioned before, a floodway and a flood fringe. The floodway, again, is where water flow depth, velocity pose a threat to to life and or property damage. And flood fringe is where there is potential, but not an immediate threat. And right now, you currently have 274 properties under the regional storm event that fall within the flood fringe. Overall, in completing the technical analysis and hydraulic analysis, HECRAS software was hydraulic modeling software was utilized, and I won't get into detail as everyone knows. We tied in the LiDAR air photos into ground control through benchmarks that were laid out. That was done in coordination with the town, Triton, and the MVCA and Dietrich Engineering, and then the floodway and flood fringe mapping was then updated in Harriston within the urban area. The next slide is I'll get right into the flood mitigation alternatives. So after November 2019, as Bill mentioned previously, there was approximately 10 to 14, if you include all the different scenarios, but 10 primary scenarios for mitigation alternatives that were then further shortlisted to primary 3 scenarios, and we further then refined them into five alternatives for the purposes of this study, which were one being the do nothing approach, which we measure all alternatives against. Just to reflect back on what Bill had mentioned, the vision is to provide corrective actions through realistic financial strategies, and that the town can complete within 20 years. And the study did look at a phased approach methodology that would reduce to reduce and eliminate property damage caused by riverine flooding. So it's important to note that there is a difference between the riverine flooding and the actual localized flooding. The HECRAS model looks at the riverine flooding, which is the actual overtopping of the riverbanks in through the town, and throughout the sub watershed, whereas the effects, say, as from surcharging of sewers was not directly analyzed through the HECRAS model. However, we are able to analyze high water levels at certain locations. The next slide just describes the next few slides describe the various alternatives. So I'll just do a quick recap of what these alternatives are. And as you can see if you can see that, sorry, this kind of describes the area of work that's required. Alternative 2 looks at the removal of the original dredge spoils, which were I believe it was in the early 50s that the river was dredged, and the spoils were then deposited on the banks of the river, of the Maitland River, downstream of Arthur Street Bridge. And that's approximately 10 acres of tree removals as well along that floodplain for approximately 1.4 kilometers. And that's all down, as I said, downstream of the Arthur Street Bridge. And there's a significant amount of regrading that would have to be done to open up the floodplain. And that does help, even from some tree removals that have been completed recently, a few years that the town has completed, that has already shown some indication of improvement on a hydraulic level. It allows the potential for ice jams and anything like that, and water to flow freely and out of the town. Alternative 3 builds on alternative 2 in that it's relocating, deepening, and widening of a portion of the existing downstream river channel. So as you can see in yellow there, it actually somewhat relocates, and that's a conceptual relocation. It's important to point out that at this point, this location and in the modeling, when the modeling was completed, it really only looked at, it gave a certain size and magnitude of the size of the capacity that was required to carry that water downstream. So the exact location for this work and will be completed as part of further detailed design, whereby any impacted landowners along that corridor will be directly consulted with. So alternative 4 is again works done within the core through the Harriston Conduit, and it also includes 2 and 3 alternatives, 2 and 3, but it involves the lowering of the and underpinning of the existing structures through the conduit, so the buildings, underpinning of those building footings, and enlarging the Yellora Street South bridge structure all the way throughout the conduit. It involves a tremendous amount of work to those that will impact those buildings, and it also involves the lowering of the Livingston right-of-way sanitary sewer that crosses the Livingston right-of-way that goes to the William Street pumping station, and that's a significant amount of infrastructure work involved. And again, like, as I mentioned, it's a large amount of disruption to the downtown core with impact to those buildings. It's important to note that, if you've read through the report, you'll notice that as we go along through the report, we end up removing that alternative. And I can get into more detail as to why that was, but again, it was mainly due to through the evaluation, it was mainly due to the overall benefit that was seen through as compared to the overall floodplain improvements. The final slide showing the alternative 5, again includes alternatives 2 and 3, and it involves the construction of seen in purple there, of a large water course extending from Blind Line to the confluence at Dredge Creek, and it's essentially a rerouting of the river around the Harriston urban area. What's important to note here is that, again, conceptually, it's shown in an area where so the conceptual areas were developed through the LiDAR mapping and the existing lay of the land, and exact locations are still yet to be determined. And I'll get into how we will achieve those steps later. But you can see where that affects some proposed development at this point too. It doesn't necessarily impact those proposed development, but it's just kind of gives you a lay of the land as to where we are with that diversion channel. The next slide is alternative 5, flood extent. So as you can see, this looks at the overall diversion channel. So alternative 5, again, the report basically concludes, as Bill mentioned, that we recommend that the town takes a phased approach. So the completion of alternative 2, 3, and 5, and this shows the red as the do nothing approach, as what we currently have for flooding. If alternative 5 is implemented, the blue is then under a regional event, storm event, the remaining flood fringe that the town will experience. So it essentially removes all the 274 structures within the flood fringe properties, with only 4 remaining. And that's basically, those 4 properties are mainly located toward the bottom of the Highway 23 bridge or structure crossing in that area. Alternative 5 flood extent for the 100-year, the next slide. It's just important. We wanted to show the 100-year event for the purposes of this study, as the June 2017 event was very impactful, and as Bill mentioned before, now that everyone has seen this event in person and it's quantifiable, so it's very important that we include this, and that essentially under that event, the alternative 5 mitigation solution would essentially eliminate all buildings within the urban core. And that kind of hits home, we felt. So it's good to if you experience, the town of Harriston were to experience a similar event, and we had these controls in place, measures in place, that in theory we would have no riverine flooding or flooding caused by riverine overtopping of the banks of the Maitland River through the town. The next slide. So we a summary of our results overall. I just wanted to get into a few key points pulled out of the report. Throughout the project, we picked two, in consultation with the MVCA, we picked 3 locations where key locations. They're strategically set because they're basically locations where we saw main bottlenecks throughout the town and during a flooding event. So we picked one just between the Elora Street and Yonge Street Bridge, which in that specific area, flooding caused by the backing up of flows at the conduit, as well as between the Arthur Street and the Elora Street Bridge after the conduit, sorry, as there is impacted buildings between that area, and then as well downstream towards the bottleneck at the confluence of Drain 12, and that's sort of where that's areas that are impacted. The lagoons are impacted in that, the sanitary lagoons are impacted at that location, and it's where the river starts to turn, and that's where we experience, that's where there's a bottleneck experienced. The next table, summary of results, I won't get into too much detail, but throughout the evaluation essentially looked at the evaluation criteria essentially looked at the number of properties removed during the 100-year and regional storm events, and we also we evaluated the comparison of estimated damages caused by flooding based on the maximum regional storm event rainfall for each parcel within the floodplain, and we using tangible damage costs. Tangible meaning things that are items that are measurable, and then assessing that against the overall the overall damage cost to the buildings, and we used the flood damage estimation guide on the Ministry of Natural Resources flood damage estimation guide to do that. And to assess the damage caused by flooding during each event. And that table just summarizes essentially what the elevations are. What's important to note on it is that upstream of the Elora Street bridge between Leslie Motors and the Legion, and I believe there was a marker set on, I think it was a CCAN structure or the shed there, during that flood event. If in a regional event, if we were experiencing a regional event, alternative 5 would essentially we would not experience flooding in that location, and it would be a drop of over 3 meters at that specific location. During a regional event, that's during a 100-year event. My apologies. So that really hits home as well, because you would not have seen flooding in that location on that day if there was a diversion alternative in place. It's also important to note that this really focuses on the urban core. I know we talk about flooding within Harriston, but the sub watershed, but it's really the urban core. So we're looking at the greater good for the urban core, and there is still flooding within the outer reaches that we experience with these alternatives in place. However, the approach is to not make that flooding any worse than it already is. So if there's experienced flooding in those areas, there may be continued to be flooding experience, but we're not to make it worse. Sorry, the next slide, which we thought was important to note. So we did a quick summary, a brief summary of the Northward Drain and the impacts. What's important here is that we're not able to take care of all flooding in the town, and that's just basically due to the lay of the land, essentially, and the existing infrastructure that's in place. However, with the Northward Drain, alternative 3, involves the lowering of the river at the Livingston right-of-way, sanitary sewer crossing. And what that does is, and I guess it might be difficult to see, and my apologies, but essentially what this chart shows, and we did that for every storm event, and we picked the 10-year storm event because, as Bill mentioned before, the February 2018 event was basically recorded as a equal to being a 10-year event. So if you can look at the alternative 2 and 3 that focus on the yellow and the red lines, if that's possible. And what we did is we took the Northward Drain in an obvert of the pipe at the outlet of the Northward Drain. So what that indicated was basically through consultation with town staff and just historically, once the Northward Drain becomes submerged due to the backing up of the river, that's an indicator that the town will see flooding at George Street, Maitland Street, Maitland and George and William Street. There will be the storm sewers will be backed up in those locations, and also backing up into anything that's tied into those storm sewers along the way. So what this does, by implementing the alternative 2 and 3 in a kind of interim scenario, you will improve flooding in those more common events. So that's important to note, as basically what we're saying is this isn't just for the regional event. By doing some of this work ahead of time in this phased approach, you will be improving on days like the February 2018 event. The next slide, and I apologize, I'm almost done. This just shows a before and after, the after also obviously being a rendering, but there will be improvements completed, and the details of that will be completed as part of the detailed design and under the Drainage Act for 2 and 3, alternatives 2 and 3. That just gives you an indication. There will be consultation with MBCA and their partners, and we've already been in discussions with them regarding the rehabilitation. The next slide just gets into the estimated capital costs. And Bill, I could turn this over to you if you want to start, if you want to carry forward the estimated capital costs and the timelines associated.
Sure, thank you, Chris. The price that came forward in November 2019 was slightly over 39 million. So in the course of a year and a bit, the engineering has actually saved the town $1 million. So, but that's a theoretical cost, because obviously alternative 5 would be one that in the study is recommended after a 10-year time frame. So that's 38.1 million. And that's proposed after 10 years. So alternative 2 is only a $2.12 million project, still very large for town standards. That is proposed in the study to be completed within 5 years. And the process to do that is the municipal drain process. I think you'll all remember that sort of that area down by Dredge Creek and the part of the Maitland in there is actually a municipal drain. And that process had actually started some years ago to do some work around Dredge Creek and so forth. This would take that work and run it through that process at 2.12 million, and would be completed within hopefully 5 years. And that would obviously be a decision of council through its the Drainage Act process. And also obviously there would need to be funds set aside to do that work. There would be some contributions. As you recall, the municipal drain process involves landowners, but the kind of work that's being talked about here, there'd be some to the highways and so forth, but probably, and Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, that the town would likely have to carry a lot of that cost of the 2.1 million. Excuse me. And then alternative 3 is 4.5 million. It's talked about within 10 years having that done. That would require a Class EA process. And then obviously, as Chris has gone through and we've talked about, alternative 2 fits within alternative 3 and builds upon the work needed downstream and below the town to do alternative 5. And then the next slide, excuse me. That just shows how the capital costs might be allocated. The 2020 to 2024, the 50,000 completes the study that's being presented to you today. There's the approvals through the Drainage Act or starting the Class EA in the next 5 years to do alternative 2. So that's got 2.2 million in costs. 2025 to 2029 would be focusing on alternative 3. You can see the Class EA approvals there, 220,000, and the capital cost of 4.2, and then the balance for alternative 5 are showed in there. So there's $1 million for approvals over a 20-year period, roughly 10 to 20-year period. We're not really sure whether that's going to be enough or too much. The capital costs, again, are estimates. Things like inflation and so forth, material costs, contracting costs can change when you're talking about periods over 10 years. So again, these are all estimates. And the next slide is how this might work financially. So the idea would be that the town would talk about this study annually at its budget meetings. The study in itself is an important tool to use when applying for senior funding from senior levels of government. I know even when I was still working for the town and in hearing discussions since, the mayor has talked about the fact that more and more opportunities will be coming forward for capital work to reduce flooding. I think the province has come to a point where they don't like paying out after the fact to compensate people, and they maybe like to be more proactive. Whether that sort of energy carries on, we'll see. The world has changed a lot in the last year. The total cost breakdown is shown in terms of the alternatives and the approvals in there. just to give a hint, and I think we talked a little bit more about this in November 2019. I think this alternative 5 is probably only achievable with, I'm thinking in the area of 65 to 70% funding from the province and the federal government. And then the town, I think, would be wise, if it hasn't already, to start putting aside money annually at its budget to a reserve to come up with its contribution towards alternative 5. And there are other ways of getting funding. Obviously, the county would be involved because we're talking about bridges over County Road 109. If you do choose to go with the alternative 5, we mentioned that half the watershed almost is in Wellington North, whether they might be one that would be wanting to help with this. There's opportunities for levying charges at people who are benefiting from this, like through the municipal drain process. So there's developer contributions. I think the town, we've done some of that work and some modeling on how that might happen, but there are a range of ideas and opportunities that your CAO and your treasurer and deputy treasurer can work with you on as far as trying to fund this over the long term. But I think if there's any one thing I can say, sort of moving into a next phase and out of this project, because it's one that's kind of been near and dear to me for certainly 5 years or more, is that starting to even put a little bit of money away now and not using it for anything else, but being ready to put your share of it forward when and if that senior level of funding comes forward. And I would hope that even a small amount, 1 or 2% on the entire municipality over 20 years certainly could start to build up. And when you add in some of the other partner funding, you can get, I think you can share the burden pretty well locally to do that and to achieve what's being proposed here. So the next slide is the next steps. Obviously, this report is on the town's website on this agenda. If anyone would like to see it, I know there has been some comments come through from people. I think town staff and Triton would like to talk about those comments, perhaps in the follow-up report and recommendation that's made to you at your next meeting. The financial strategy I touched on a little bit under the last slide. I think that will be incumbent upon your CAO and treasurer and financial people to come forward to you with your budget approach. But if I had any one last sort of suggestion, it would be to start small and start putting money away, because this is a long process. And as I recall from the public meetings that we all endured kind of early on after the flooding, people wanted to see things happen. And I guess my worst fear is that, we spent a year or two here doing technical work, and if something else were to happen and another flood were to occur, and sort of, I think the public will want to see concrete actions. I'm sure you've heard that out in the community. So also, aside from constructing this work, which would be obviously the largest capital project ever for the town, there will have to be a maintenance program developed. And I think Chris touched on it, and Mike may touch on it a little bit further. If you do these large changes to the floodplain downstream and so forth, you have to go in and maintain these things so the trees don't go back up, and so that things don't get change to the point where they don't work. So there is maintenance work that will need to be budgeted for as well. So it's a major undertaking for the town. I think the idea here is to split it up and sort of eat the elephant one little bite at a time. And the next slide, I think, is where Mike will come in.
Yep. Thanks. This is just kind of a recap here and where we're at today. So in December, we did apply to the National Disaster Mitigation Program for additional funding. Currently, the application's for $468,000, which would be used to try to formalize all these ideas to get like a more detailed design and which will also help with coming up with a more accurate cost estimate for all these sort of bite-sized projects along the way, and to give council a better opportunity to make more informed decisions as we move forward with the different components along the way. And then for another next step, so next council meeting, we will be bringing back another report with recommendations as to how to proceed based on any further conversations here tonight. So I guess at this point, we'll open it up to the floor for questions to the experts that are here today.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mike. Now I can't see everybody when you got the slides up. Did you want to take them down, or there you are? Good. Okay. I can see everybody now. Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, just quick, in getting money, can we use any part of developmental fees to move towards that, Bill?
Hi, Councillor Elliott. Sorry, I missed the beginning part of your question. I think I had a little bit of an internet.
Can we use parts of developmental fees or increase developmental fees to put monies away for this kind of project?
The Development Charges Act could be used. I know that, as I recall, the town has updated that in the last few years since I left.
Yes.
I don't know whether they included any of this work in that.
Yeah, I guess
So
on that.
I'm not sure if the development charges could be, I think, in another update to that in 5 years, you could look at adding that in, because, development in theory incrementally adds to the here, but through the Planning Act now, like for instance, the Shikodan subdivision, or the one that's going kind of in the Lawrence Street area, they're all required to not be in the floodplain anymore.
Right.
But there's talk in the study that, if it was a little further on down the line, and say the town was close to getting funding for alternative 5, those developments could be a lot different and a lot less expensive. But I'm just not sure that timing is going to work out. But I think there's ways of getting area rates from people who benefit. For example, if say the town does the $2 million project, alternative 2, and that takes 20 people out of the floodplain, and they no longer need flood insurance or whatever, maybe they would contribute towards something because, the town has created a benefit for them. I mean, that obviously would need a lot of discussion with people and a lot of public input toward it, but there is a funding source that way. And the other thing is, to upstream, you'll need to be careful when developments come forward, especially in the rural areas, that whatever is done doesn't kind of aggravate what the town has planned down here. But so the short answer is yes, to some degree, maybe in a future update to the Development Charges Act study, that you could include some of that work. And I think in your community improvement plan too, you included watershed or floodplain work, so people could actually, if they were benefiting the floodplain and improving the situation, they could get grants and tax reductions and things for that.
Yeah, and I think, Bill, you had said earlier that we're going to be, tonight, we're going to discuss, I mean, I understand, Councillor Elliott, we haven't really cracked the whole nut on the dollars yet. So they're working on a bunch of different angles as to where we might go with it, but a good question, and we'll put that into the bin as we go forward with planning and how we might want to pay for this, right? Yeah. Anybody else? I just want to say, well done, everybody. And I know, Steve, I haven't seen you for a while, but I know you're still working hard out there in Maitland. And this is something we had to do. We had to get to this point. And I think now the next steps, we take it back, we look at it a bit further and a little more detail in some of the aspects is funding and that type of thing. I think it was talked about a few times about shovel-ready projects. I'm feeling hopefully very confident that we're going to get Mike some of that money to do some of the more studies. The feeling I get from FCM and from the federal government on flood mitigation And even today, the last couple of days at Roma, I sat in one session where they had they did the flood in Chatham-Kent, and they did the flood up in Ottawa, and they did the flood somewhere else, and I can't remember where exactly, on the top of my head. And they had the ministry people on there, and they're really talking, like Bill had mentioned, do we want to keep just putting a Band-Aid on the problem? And in other words, when we do have these floods and these major costs to everybody, and it's not just the financial costs, it's losing all your your history and your home and everything else. It's very, very traumatic situation when you flood it out. If anybody's ever been in that situation, I think Gord, you felt it, the pain. Anyways, they're looking at maybe saying, are we going to keep doing this every time there's this situation, or are we going to try to do something that actually fixes the problem? And I think it always looks like a big number. But at the end of the day, I seem to remember a study, I don't know, Steve, back in 1970 something, where they were talking about a dam at one time, and they didn't do it because it was $2.5 million. In 1970, that would have been probably $30 million today. So, we have to start somewhere. And I think I like the stage approach, and it is not an overnight thing. And I think, Bill, you took I always say eat an elephant one bite at a time, and you took that already. So I don't know how you did that on me, but you did that. Anyways, that's sort of where I see it tonight. And we're taking it tonight just forward, and we're going to come back with a full report, another report from the people. And hopefully a lot of the attendees are on tonight, and it's going to be on the website. And I'm sure we're going to get some feedback from tonight's meeting. And that's my comments anyways. Anybody else have anything? I think Deputy Mayor Turton, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Bridge. I mean, a lot of, quite often, too many reports accumulate dust. They get put on the shelf, and I know the number of people that have put their time and effort into this particular project. I mean, it's a partnership. I agree with that. That's been said numerous times, and we've proven in the past that when we do put a bit of money aside and be shovel ready, that's the town's proof that we're serious. And I think at one of the last meetings at the community center downtown Hairston, we did commit to getting on with this project, considering funding and different things like that. And I know that we have, Mike and his crew have done a lot of work down on the discharge end of Hairston. So one question I had was, I've got a lot of notes here. The Livingston septic piping that you talked about, with these two projects, 2 and 3, we won't touch it. True or false, Chris?
That would be true. You will not touch it with, so the lowering of the river channel, the existing river channel would occur after the Livingston right-of-way crossing.
Right.
Yep. So what that will do is basically, essentially, you've got about a 6-inch clearance from the obvert of that pipe to the top of to the bottom of your riverbed. So
right.
There's not much movement there, obviously. If you had to make any changes to that, you'd have to make changes to the William Street pumping station as well.
Yeah, that's a big dollar value. So, I mean, I know that you and Chris and Steve have talked to our farmers down at that end. By opening that up, there'll be no problem. Like, I mean, our farmers down there are really behind us here, like Mr. Fisher and Mr. Tarr and some of those guys. There'll be no issues with opening it up. There'll be no resistance to that, will there, from the farmers?
Who wants that one, Bill?
Yeah.
Maybe I know that Steve Jackson did right after the flood event even meet out on the property with those farmers and that you mentioned. I think there were comments through the public process from them, and they obviously they haven't committed to say yes, you can go on and do that. I think do that work. I think they know of the work. I think that they would like to see flooding reduced. and that they're prepared to talk to council about how these alternative 2 and 3 might happen. But you'd need to have a final agreement with them that dictated the terms by which the town could go on their property, what restoration and maintenance would have to be done, and what compensation, if any, would be given to them. But I don't know, Steve, if you could characterize your meetings with those people that you did speak to.
Yeah, thank you. So when we look at the different alternatives, particularly between 2 and 3, like even 3, depending on the area, could be using croppable land. So I think there clearly are impacts to those landowners. So and that's why I think it's important going forward, as Bill said, that there's good communications and agreements and discussions, and particularly in alternative 3, there's some options to where that goes. So working with those landowners to find the best possible option for them that still is able to achieve the flood objectives, I think is critical.
Yeah, and I think Chris, you mentioned that just looking at the map, don't take that as the road it's going to go. We haven't made that determination yet. You still have to do some more work with the landowners. So good comments. Yeah. Judy, are you got your hand up, or I wasn't sure? Okay, there you go.
Yes, I was just curious. We've done some work downstream there, taking out some trees and dredged some, I guess dredged a little bit out of the river, and then I'm assuming we got rid of some of the dredged soils along the side. That's kind of an alternative 2 thing. Do we have any idea what kind of a percentage of that work we've done?
Chris, did you want
to? Very little, I would say, based on the grand, like if you're in, sorry, Councillor Dirksen, are you speaking to the entire encompassing alternative 5 or just the downstream works 2 and 3?
No, just number 2 was taking out, I believe it was 10 hectares or something of trees. And I mean, people think we've taken out a lot of trees, but I'm just wondering what kind of a percentage of that have we done? Like, have we got 10% of the trees out of there, or like, I mean, I know you're just ballparking, but I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, Mike, can you comment on the amount or where that's gotten to?
Yeah, we've removed about 2.5 hectares of the trees currently, so only about a quarter of the work required at this point. But then even with the elevations, nothing's been finalized there. We could be at the right elevation, or there might have to be other spoils removed with the formalized plan.
Okay, but it's nice we kind of have a little bit of a head start on that anyways. So
yeah, for sure.
So that's good.
Yeah, and I think it was referred to earlier, Councillor Dirksen, that some of that work on some of our smaller events certainly has helped. Hydraulics has helped. So, and I know for a fact that we were quite concerned with ice jams in that area because of the trees all laying down in the thing, and so we don't have that concern right now. So that's good too. But yeah.
Thanks.
Anybody else?
Mayor Bridge, I don't know if everybody,
Go.
I don't know if everybody else had to. There's a little thing that popped up under Q&A, and there's one there, and I know you probably aren't opening the floor to the public for questions. I don't even know how many might be listening, but it asked the question that's asked under my screen, and I don't know if you all had it or not.
I've got it now, Bill. Yep.
But they're asking about a check valve on the Northward drain, and I think there's a quick answer to that, and that's why I thought maybe Mike would want to answer about whether a check valve would help on the Northward drain, because Chris did talk about even on it, if you did alternative 2, how a 10-year floodplain would drop that river level, and what the check valve might do, but it might sort of help prevent water from going up the drain. But
yeah, if Mike wants to speak to that, I believe we've got that check valve in there, Mike, have we not?
There is one currently in place. As for how it is beneficial, However, but there is the opportunity if there is a blockage or something lodged in place that could stop it from working properly or functioning properly. But we have seen positive results with it in place as well.
Thanks, Bill, for that. Yeah. And we'll take all, and anybody who wants to send anything in chat, we'll take that and put it towards our next report, I believe. That'd be good. Okay. Anybody else got anything? Well, again, thank you very much for the report, everybody that was involved in this report. It was a little longer coming because of COVID and other things, but we certainly have it on our plate now and we want to go forward with it. I'm with Deputy Mayor Turton. I don't want this sitting on a shelf getting dust, Deputy Mayor. We have to act on some of this. And I think there's some of the earlier stuff we can certainly act on within a budgetary process and hopefully get some funding to get going on the first couple anyways in the next few years. So I'm excited about that. And then overall we can go for this. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Turton.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Bridge. I see our treasurer's on the here now, so maybe he's got some good news for us.
No good news. Mine is not bad news. Good news, just you know how we're in these COVID times and all that. I just wanted to mention that if we do get a favorable decision on the last NDMP, because it's planning and designing and that, we can go forward with that. Pretty much no matter what. It's not dependent on the weather. We're actually, as we prove, meeting in person and that. So I think that's one thing that I think the public can be confident that we're at least going to go further in the planning stages. And if the funding comes through, we have it in our budget to handle our share of it. So that may take us through for the next year anyway.
Yeah, and I didn't want to jinx this, Gord. I was hoping that, but I feel comfortable about that one. I think we have a good opportunity for that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? If not, then I will moved by Councillor Elliott, second by Deputy Mayor Turton. The Council of the Town of Minto receives the Hairston Flood Mitigation Study Report for information. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Good, thank you. Moved by Councillor Anderson, second by Councillor McKenzie, that the Committee of the Whole convenes at a regular council meeting. All in favor? Carried. Moved by Councillor Gutson, second by Councillor Dirksen, that the Council of the Town of Minto ratifies the motions made in the Committee of the Whole. All in favor? Good. Moved by Deputy Mayor Turton, second by Councillor Elliott, that bylaw number 2021-08 to confirm the actions of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Minto be introduced, read first, second, and third time and passed in open council, seal of the corporation. All in favor? Moved by Councillor McKenzie, second by Councillor Anderson. Just before I close, thanks everybody that attended, all the attendees. I don't know who they all were, but thanks for coming and participating and then we'll go from there. That the Council of the Town of Minto adjourns to meet again at the call of the mayor. Thanks for good meeting, everybody. All in favor?
Thank you.
Have a good night. Stay safe.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye,
For
everyone.
Terry Forrest, Bill.